So welcome to our May Discovering History seminar. It does feel like a little while since we've been together. This is a partnership between La Trobe University, the Goldfields Library and Bendigo Regional Archives Centre. And my name is Dr. Emma Robertson and I'm from the history programme at the La Trobe Bendigo campus. I'd like to acknowledge, before we start, that we're meeting today on beautiful Jarrah country. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present, and to extend that respect to any First Nations people that might be joining us either here in the room, or we also have some guests with us on Zoom today. So tonight we have two speakers, so we have a packed programme, both on the histories of hotels and hoteliers and alcohol in Bendigo. And I think there'll be a shared theme as well of sources and engaging with primary sources. First up, we'll have Mary Healy, who's sharing her research on Heffernan of the Shamrock, and you can see here. And then second, we'll have Desiree Pettit from the Bendigo Regional Archives Centre joining us to share some insights into the boozy resources in the Bendigo collections, and we'll come to that soon enough. So each speaker will have about 30 minutes with some time for questions, and afterwards Mary does have some books for sale on the desk just behind you all as well. So without further ado, I will introduce our very first speaker who's hiding behind Mary. Mary now lives on a property out near Heathcote, but she actually grew up in the southeastern suburbs of Melbourne. And she was telling me how her research journey began when she was looking for a project to occupy her while her young baby was asleep. And she spent many hours in the State Library Victoria trawling the hard copy newspapers in the pre-Trove days. And her research draws, though, on her deep family connections to the region. Her first book, Railways and Pastures, The Australian O'Keeffes, told the story of partly of her great-grandfather who built the railway we now know as the O'Keeffe Rail Trail. And this latest book was the product of 10 years of research and unfortunately was published right at the start of lockdowns, and so it's been a while before Mary's been able to really get out and promote this book. So it's a real pleasure to have Mary to introduce this to us in person tonight. So I'll hand over to Mary.
Thank you for coming, everyone, and thank you, Emma, and the library for all help I received when I worked here and for today. Now, I've come to tell you about William Heffernan. He was born in Shorenell, Tipperary Island, in 1803. The British had occupied and exploited the Irish people since Oliver Cromwell's wars lasting about a decade, which killed 20% of the population by about 1650. The British Puritans overtowered the Irish Catholic natives. They could not practice their religion either. This is the reason why they perhaps built large churches here. When Heffernan was young, his family would have only eked out an existence from a small holding allocated by the foreign landlord. Families were usually starving and only knew how to cook potatoes, as they were not allowed to learn to read and write. William Heffernan enlisted in the Royal Irish Constabulary. I forgot to say, there's many derivations of names from Irish people, and this I think dates back to the fact that they couldn't write properly. Sometimes they even wrote in X, but there's a lot of different names that mean the same thing. William Heffernan enlisted in the Royal Irish Constabulary at a young age, which provided him with the opportunity of a warm green uniform, board and a roof over his head. The RIC, the work at first was to collect revenue from the distillers who were producing the Ishabeha, or whiskey, where the first place in the world where whiskey was produced. Then, as time went on, the officers had other orders, and they were to evict the Irish people from their cottages and burn them to the ground. I believe this became too much for Heffernan, as he did not enrol again to stay in the RIC and saw an opportunity to go to Nova Scotia. It was some kind of a scheme like we know happened to people who settled in Van Diemen's Land, who were rewarded military people, and they were given a property. This happened for the Irish in Nova Scotia too, but I think a large area was a little bit more than they could take after living on a very small holding. I believe Heffernan decided to leave Ira seeking a better life and but to another British colony. Life was tough there too, and he married Margaret Kirk in Bobscott, Maine. They had 2 daughters, Catherine and Sarah. Margaret was the daughter of an RIC member and migrated to New York the year before they married. When back in Nova Scotia, he met John Crowley, who worked as a draper in the Halifax area. Now he was his partner. Times were tough, especially for the Irish. We read that outside employment opportunities, there was a sign called Nina, which said no Irish need apply. So you were on the starvation border again. Heffernan saw he should follow another dream and make his way to California in a hurry. He may have gone for an engagement in the only timber or fur industry, but whatever the reason, he just took off for his Californian trek. He made his way to New York, where he boarded a ship to take him to the Isthmus of the Panama, where he disembarked on the east side and undertook a 50-mile trek through the jungle alone to the Pacific on the west side. We don't know whether he disembarked there to save the many months it would have taken to go around the South American coast, or whether he simply didn't have the fare. However, there were many dangers in the undertaking, though. This tropical area, varying from the native Indians to adders, monkeys, mosquito and fever dangers, alligators, snakes, to name but a few. The vegetation was described by Frank Marriott, who said that every growing thing clings to and embraces its neighbour most lovingly here. It is a bunch of tangled parasites that bind a palm tree by 1,000 bands to a majestic teak. The pair they have united. How would you walk through all this? William Heffernan conquered this great walk, and he was the first white man to walk across the Isthmus of the Panama. Despite all this, at a comparatively old age, he was about 45. Irish people usually only lived till they were 64 or so. He then came to the west and caught probably the fortnightly mail ship that took him to Yerba Buena, which was the Mexican name for San Francisco. Fortunately, he was one of the first to arrive, and again, in harsh, inhospitable conditions, panning was carried out in freezing rivers where the sun never shone. Heffernan won reasonable amounts of gold, but didn't stop until he found a reef in Nevada worth $20,000 US in about 1848. After this success, he returned to Maine, and at that time his wife had died, so he married again an 18-year-old person called Rebecca Murphy. It wasn't long before he pursued the gold rush, which was news in California of the Victorian rush. He set about and hired a ship called Eagle, which he had to obtain people to come with him. And he still tried again. He purchased many goods, including flour, which he saw had been expensive in California. But unfortunately, it was a very rough voyage, and all the flour was ruined. He also brought mining picks and cradles, which were new to our field, but he couldn't sell the cradles because the miners couldn't afford them. Many miners accompanied him, who he met with in California, and included also his relations, Michael and Nancy Murphy. Nancy Murphy was the sister of Rebecca, his partner and his new partner John Crowley and his wife Eleanor, Henry Powell, who was shot at the Eureka as an observer in the distance, and the famous Jas McGill, who was second in charge. As well, we were lucky enough to read in the newspapers all the merchandise that came on the ship. But one interesting lot that didn't seem to belong to a fictitious person was 2 cases of rifles. I believe they were probably McGill's, and they were to go to Ballarat. The journey was very rough. They were lucky to get here. It took 6 months. On arrival at Hobson's Bay, Williamstown, in 1853, they learned that McIver diggings, that's Heathcote, was the place to head for. So he and John Crowley walked, and the women and Catherine and Sarah rode in the buggy. They were lucky, they brought a buggy with them. This was more unusual. Most people had to walk. They only stayed there for a short time, and we see in one of Geoffrey Hocking's books that John Crowley signed the Red Ribbon Rebellion petition, but a lot of them went missing probably in it's one of the biggest gold robberies ever that was out of Heathcote. We assume that William Heffernan did sign it, but probably his name was lost in the robbery. They soon moved on to the Sandhurst field. Heffernan and Crowley walked to Sandhurst. They had to wait for the river at Campaspe at Axdale to be suitable time to cross. And they established the Hibernian restaurant, which did well, but they soon, in 1854, purchased the Theatre Royal, which is on the current Shamrock site. They started the business, and the hotel was the place where miners flocked, with free entry, and payment was for the drinks, which we assume they made a profit. Potable water was expensive and very scarce, and most miners were unsuccessful. The Shamrock served as a place for relaxation on benches instead of staying in the confines of their muddy tent area, which often had their mine and mud therein. The hoteliers profited greatly, and in the late 50s they engaged a German architect, William Varland, to design the Georgian 3-storey Shamrock Hotel. Extensions were carried out soon after a fire which was on Christmas Day, and £8,000 in damages was done. The building was remodeled again. The new Shamrock included a concert hall which attracted international entertainers to perform there, 30 plus bedrooms, a smoking room and a bowling alley in the basement. The wages bill was about £200 a week, and the profits were great for their 6 nights a week enterprise, when they had at least 800 to 1,200 people in their hotel 6 nights a week. We think, doing a calculation, this might have been about 500,000 guests a year. The opening of the Sandhurst Railway in 1864 proved a boon to many of the hotels, as 5,000 people could travel daily and return to Bendigo. The mining exchange was close to the Shamrock and Victoria hotels, so those in the lengthy queue near the mining exchange, which is along there in Pall Mall, the Beehive building I think it is, broke their queue and temporarily had a thirst quencher, because it would have been hot, you know. The Victoria Hotel was conducted by William Heffernan's protege, Jeremiah Heffernan, who was, we don't know, but was he a long-lost son from Ireland who arrived on the field soon after Heffernan? We don't know, but they stayed in a relationship for a long time. In fact, when Heffernan and Crowley ran the Shamrock, They also had another Shamrock out at Huntly, which he was the manager of, and all the artists went to that hotel as well. In summary, the Shamrock was, in the words of J.F. Hogan, the book The Irish in Australia, says that the Shamrock was Hibernian and a great institution in Sandhurst, being capacious and comfortable hostelry, notwithstanding its aggressive Hibernian title. It has been the headquarters of visitors from all nations under the sun, and a favourite resort of successive generations of gold diggers. The concert hall also operated for 16 years. Heffernan was the public relations man who stood at the door every single night, welcoming guests and ensuring they respected the artists, and silence was maintained during the performances. He was always the face of business. Oh, what did he look like? We couldn't find any photos. In fact, the only description I came across was a satirical piece written by D. Cameron in his book called Scripopolis, The Mysteries and Miseries of Scripopolis. He was also known as Demonex, and he wrote Heffernan was a thin, wiry old man. This is about 1870. With a dark beard, shaved about the mouth, so that the beard resembled a frill, and of this description, a Darwinian public puzzling physiognomy. Then, in order to satisfy my desire, I asked artist Paul Casey, who lives in Bendigo, to ask him to paint it. So this is that's Paul's interpretation, because we didn't have a photo and we still don't. I am certain that Heffernan had many personal skills when greeting his death, but poor John Crowley seemed to be the person who had to keep the books. He also organised the supplies of food and drink to be secured. Fruit and vegetable supplies were in short supply due to the great population influx, and also because the growers decided to join the gold rush too. The Shamrock Hotel proved to be the location of the first land sale auctions. In fact, the meeting place for the foundation groups of the hospital, Agricultural Society, Fire Brigade, the Future Racing Club, early meetings for even the Commonwealth of Australia called the A&A Association after Heffernan came. But Heffernan's really good contribution with Hadley, who ran the city family, put up quite a bit of prize money for the Bendigo gift at Easter, which was the forerunner of our Easter parade. Heffernan and Crowley also assisted the German priest, Reverend Henry Bacchus, to form the Bacchus estate, which was designed to give failed miners another opportunity of employment in life. They sort of helped him buy land, mostly out at Axedale, but some other places too around the district. He had seen the evils of unemployment in Germany, where he'd come from. Now, returning to the food shortages for the Shamrock Hotel, Heffernan and Crowley purchased land called the Willows at Axedale. It's on the right as you departing from Bendigo after you cross the bridge at Campaspe. It was called the Willows. I think that was an affectionate name because I believe people used willow baskets in the river beds in California, so he might have thought fondly of the Willows. It produced lamb and beef and had 20 acres of prime land stocked with the finest fruit trees supplied with and from a pumping engine near the Campaspe, along with a vegetable garden. At one stage, the Shamrock needed more workers in the dairy aspect, so Heffernan sent his sister-in-law, Nancy Murphy, back to Maine to bring the Flanagan family here to fulfil those duties. We can see what an enormous enterprise the Shamrock Hotel really was. It did not satisfy Heffernan though, because he really loved opera. So in the early 70s, he decided he would build what we call the St James Theatre, called after famous theatres in London and everywhere. It was a hall which he built at the cost of £5,000. It was 100 feet long, 40 feet broad, 30 feet high, and accommodates about 1,500 guests. It opened in the 8th of April, and the Philharmonic Society gave a grand rendition of Handel's Judas Maccabeus. One Bendigo wrote in the Bendigo Advertiser that William Heffernan was the essence of contradictions. For instance, he built the theatre with the idea of making it a first-class opera house, and yet he had placed stables at the very front on the ground floor. Perhaps this was to solve a horse parking problem when you came to the opera. Heffernan promoted operas, and he presented the Lister Operas Company with full-based La Traviata, Faust, Bride, La Homamore, and Maritana. That was by an Irish composer. He and Crowley also had shows in the Lyceum to Litford Town. Newspapers reported that crowds were down and the bells of the St Paul's Cathedral interfered with the opera. But the energetic and indefatigable William Heffernan repainted and many more times and still presented the opera for audiences. He is always to the front of everything. When he redounded to the credit of the city, gold receipts were falling. This didn't stop him. He then decided to set about drawing up plans for the Royal Princess Theatre, which was up near the art gallery on the other side, number 73 of Viewpoint. He did engage Gertzman and Varland again, but one of those partners became sick, so they advised him to use Johnson from Melbourne. I think he designed the Fitzroy Town Hall. The Royal Princess was a magnificent building, seating 2,000 people. It had an orchestra pit, audience seating in the 3 levels of the theatre. There was a gallery of 850, dress circle 250, stalls 200, a pit of 650, and a further 650 persons were accommodated in stage boxes. The auditorium was 80 feet wide by 60 feet long. On entering the auditorium, the eye-catching features were the tasteful proscenium arch with stylish act drop and associated drapery, and a large dome housing the austral lustre light, which had 119 lamp gasolier. Designed locally by T.J. Connolly, they had their tin works on the corner near the fountain. It measured 10 feet in diameter. It had enamelled glass casing, measured and contained multicoloured glass, and so immense it was beautiful. The Royal Princess was elegance of grand Victorian manner, a world of crimson plush and drapes, of brocade and gilt, and opulent embellishment. This is in the words of writers at the time. It opened in a blaze of jewels and gaslit on the 11th of August 1874 with a performance of Offenbach's Grand Duchess of Gerolstein. The capacity of the new theatre was larger than the present Sydney Opera House. In the Annals of Bendigo, it wrote there was an immense audience on the occasion, and there were loud calls for Billy, the lessee. And that gentleman came forward and received tremendous ovation. He made a characteristic speech which was worthy of being recorded. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, it is now 22 years since I first came to Bendigo, and I did not think I would ever live to see a place like this. Especially to see so many young ladies." Renewed applause. "I do not deserve this applause, but I thank you sincerely for it. I beg you deserve the applause, but I thank you sincerely for it. I beg you my most sincere thanks, and I hope you will never let it down. I do not mean to say that at my age I am actually a ladies' man myself." The elaborate interior, curtains and stage, backdrop, scenery were produced in Melbourne, and no expenses had been spared, and the building was said to have cost about $15,000. That was the interior as well. The stage was lit with gas until 1898, when DC power became available. During the opening, J.C. Williamson and his wife Maggie Moore appeared in the famous Struck Oil. The most famous night when the show was on was Madame Ilma Demerska, who were entertained in the hall, but 10,000 people came to Bendigo, apart from the 2,000 in the theatre. And they accompanied her in her carriage, which went from the hotel to the theatre and back, and they wouldn't go home until she sang the last rose of summer from the balcony. Unfortunately, the success did not last, and Heffernan could not sell enough seats. He had a bad manager, and the Royal Princess was just yet a bad decision of his. To build it, he had surrendered the titles of the Shamrock, St James Hall, and the farm at Axdale Willows in order to raise the £12,000 that he needed. But with the population going, none of these things were possible to be paid. Unfortunately, the Royal Princess Theatre, which was at 60 View Street, almost opposite the gallery, was demolished in 1863, allowed by the Bendigo Council, for a service station. Now, we decide that Heffernan was a great dreamer who loved opera, but to believe that the golden days would last forever, and he had always left the financial management to his partner, John Crowley. William's wife, Rebecca, née Flanagan, who was many years younger than him, like he was about 46, I think, when he married her, and she was 18, worried about her future as she had formed unfavourable opinions about John Boyd Watson, his lender. The two met when Heffernan was supposed to have saved Watson's life in the Californian bar where Heffernan was working during the Californian gold rush. Rebecca encouraged her husband to take action for her, and a case for the recovery of their titles was filed by William Heffernan in the Equity Court. In this case, he attempted to escape liability, which he had with his friend John Boyd Watson. Nancy Murphy, his sister-in-law, travelled all the way from Dunedin to be a witness. So were Bendigonians, W.P. Neal, M. McFadden, the Victorian bank manager, John Crowley, and neighbours from the nearby Willows farm. Heffernan obtained a reasonable settlement, but he was not able to fund the mortgages that he had to take to buy back the properties. On examination, his life, it is obvious that Heffernan always attempted to improve his lot, and this is a good example for those who start life with little or nothing. The police were paid on the Goldfields and they earned commissions. One policeman was said to have earned £15,000 above his salary in commissions. So then we read that in 1870, a woman who supposedly was drunk and disorderly sought refuge in the hotel on a Sunday night. Now, you couldn't go to hotels on Sunday night. Heffernan decided to come to the rescue of this woman, who was Myra McLaughlin, who was probably the daughter of the well-respected magistrate Lachlan McLaughlin, who was credited with calming diggers in relation to the miners' licence laws. Heffernan, in the hope of saving her family's reputation, offered a surety of £10,000 in February 1870. I believe he was a man with an active social conscience and endeavoured to help others who had fallen on difficult times. An example of this was his address to the Red Ribbon campaign from a wagon on Sydney Flat in 1853. That was soon after they came, and there were many agitations in Bendigo or Sandhurst. And in fact, Sandhurst looked such a threat. Every miner had a gun that the British left us alone. And they went to Ballarat, where they weren't very well organised. Like, there were rallies of perhaps 10,000 people around this Castlemaine and Bendigo. It was a great marauding, powerful group. I was lucky enough to read an extract from C. McAllister in 1905, which was his recollection of Heffernan on the Red Ribbon Rebellion protests. Now, he was a little bit mixed up because it was 50 years after he'd seen this instance, but he said Tom Heffernan, but he described him as a burlish Irishman, then the proprietor of the old Shamrock Hotel there, who was a bit of a character to a crowd of some 6,000 or 7,000 diggers, head of what he called on Sydney Flat, for the reason that most of the people camping thereabouts were Sydneysiders. Heffernan, I remember, strongly advised the diggers to make short work of the drastic aims and regulations of the law. He said that in California, if they tried such Russian games, and we'd paralyse the jacks in the office in 2 minutes. He went on to ask if they meant to make Australia a free country, or were they going to sweat like slaves and curs under the lash, and then be content to be treated like dogs by titled tyrants and lickspittle toadies of kings and queens. This is the kind of eloquence, rough and rude it may have been, but direct, earnest and emphatic, generally addressed to the diggers. So this is what he was prepared to do, and so this is Heffernan's life, and I have some other pieces for you to see, so I could pass them around. So that's about all what I found about him.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. It looks like Mary's just going to pass a few things around. Well, Desiree is just maybe getting set up, just putting herself in. Were there any questions for Mary? We can also carry on chatting afterwards, but anything that people particularly wanted to know?
When he failed financially in Victoria, he then went to the Murphys in New Zealand, and he worked with Nancy for a while. She was widowed, They actually took the plans that Heffernan and Murphy had drawn up in 1871 and built the City Hotel in Dunedin. That's the Murphys. But he went there to help Nancy, because she was by herself then. But then, some years later, he decided to run the Pier Hotel, also in Dunedin, and he died at 88 in the hotel, still working.
That's great. That's Mary. Thank you. So yeah, you lived to a ripe old age. So we're gonna Mary's just going to circulate some things around, but we're going to invite Desiree now to I don't really know how to introduce Desiree, but Desiree is from the Bendigo Regional Archives Centre. And she's going to do a little bit of, I don't know, performance art, I'm not sure, about sources that we have on hotels and hoteliers in Bendigo. Thank you. I'm going to pass it to you.
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
I have to put my teacher's voice on? Excellent. Well, of all the gin joints in all of the world, you stumbled into ours at BRAC, upstairs in the library here on a Wednesday and a Thursday. And we've got about 6 kilometres of shelving in our repositories, and as you can imagine, there's an awful lot of ingredients that you can fit on 6 kilometres of shelving. But tonight, to reflect what Mary's been talking about and the amazing research she's done, we're going to look at what resources, ingredients we've got that will help you research hotels and pubs around the Bendigo district. So with any good cocktail, you need to start with a good foundation. So our foundation documents when we're looking at pubs and hotels are the documents and the record series that are created exclusively for the management and the regulation of hotels. So these would not exist if hotels didn't exist. So we start off with our defunct hotel licenses. So these are a digitised collection that you can look up from anywhere from home on the Public Records Victoria website. And it basically gives details of, as the name suggests, hotels no longer in operation. So you see a little bit of information there about the license holders, about the owners, about where it is. So this is the Crown Hotel just across the road. If you step back onto this side, you can actually see Crown still across the top. And if you go up to the top floor of the car park and look down the side, you can actually see some wonderful old signage still painted on the bricks down that alleyway up very high. As you can see, there's occasionally get some little notes about people who are deceased, or they've moved, or some transfers. And these are things that aren't necessarily picked up in Trove. So this is a place that you might find a few different bits and pieces. The other record set that we have is our lemon sugar rim. And these are the licensing registers. So the ones that we have upstairs cover 1888 through to 1969, so quite late. Haven't even drunk anything yet. There we go. And so it's a really extensive collection. So at its core, it records, as the name again suggests, the licenses that are issued to hoteliers and butlers to run their establishments. And as you can see in this one, this is from 1967. And it also shows when they need a permit to serve liquor with food. So it's not just bar service, they're needing to apply for a separate permit. So the other bits and pieces that we find in this collection include a fairly comprehensive list of the various pubs that existed around Bendigo and where they were. Now sometimes they're quite oblique, so Long Gully, Ironbark. Other times they'll actually give you a street. So that can help license holders. And again, there's pages and pages and pages of these. That will give you a lot of information about who the license holders were, where it was being transferred, all of those comings and goings. It wasn't just pubs that needed a license. You needed a license if you were a grocer. You needed a license if you wanted to sell wine, if you wanted to sell colonial spirits. I'm not even sure what that would look like around here. Also, if you wanted to have a billiard table, you better believe that you would have to go to the licensing court and get a permit to do that. Occasionally you'll see just some random papers rammed into those records. So this is a letter that's just randomly in the papers of those documents about the Harp and Shamrock. So Shamrock, very popular part of naming. And this is the Drake family, who are fairly prolific hoteliers around the Axedale district. You also needed a permit. This Mr. Ryan from the Freemasons Hotel had obviously been successful in tendering for the refreshment booths on Bendigo Cup Day in 1884. Again, he would have to trundle off and get a specific permit to allow him to run his refreshment booth at the races. And that was the same for sports days. It's really useful for seeing how pubs and how hoteliers were interacting with the community more broadly outside of their own hotels. Now, we've got our foundations out of the way. Now we need to start thinking about some ingredients. So these are records where the hotels appear and hoteliers appear, but they're not specifically about hotels, but they are there in their own right. So the first one we've got are the Bendigo rate books. Now these are a terrific collection. We've got the physical copies upstairs from 1856 through until 1994. And basically, here's one of these. They will tell you exactly where a hotel was located, because the Bendigo ones helpfully are outlined by street profile. So you'll get an intersection and then a row of streets that were all neighbours, and then the next intersection. Really, really helpful if you're not sure about where a building actually was, if it doesn't exist anymore. You can locate it using those rate books. It will also give you the owners, and it will also give you the license holders. So again, if there's some sort of transfer where you're missing people, you'll get them here. Now this is a good example of being able to trace one of those pubs forward. So we start off in 1864, Henry Tonkin has got a beer shop out in White Hills. So fairly vague. Beer shop, hotels, we always remind people that that doesn't necessarily mean a big, grand, Valen designed edifice. It could be someone's front room. So if you're finding an ancestor that was a Vittler or a hotelier, it might have just been their front room that they were opening up and serving beer. So it's not always a great big grand building. So we see that he moves. 1886, we've now got Landon Hotel rather than a beer shop. We've got Plum Region, Raglan Street. It's owned by Robert Cox, but he's still the hotel keeper. So this is how we can use the rate books to trace a building, a particular hotel forward. We jump forward to post-war, and we've got Jeremiah O'Dwyer, who's now the hotel keeper, still in the ownership of, not in the ownership, it's gone to the Conn brothers. Still in the same place. And then 2 years later, we've now got a storekeeper and a Landon store. So we can see there where that hotel has obviously gone out of business, being delicensed. And you would probably find a record for that in that initial delicensed hotels list that we looked at earlier. The next one we've got, and this is possibly my favourite part of the collection upstairs, is the correspondence collection. So this is every piece of correspondence that was sent to the city of Bendigo was retained. We've got a collection catalogued up to the turn of the century. There's 16,800 individual letters in that collection. Thankfully, it's been indexed, so you can actually do a search by a name or a hotel or a keyword. Here you can see our man of the moment, Mr. William Heffernan, has written to the council. So we've got his signature there, and we've got a little bit about basically saying, heard you're planting some trees, if you've got some leftovers, wouldn't mind having my hands on them. Absolutely, absolutely. So really good. I know there's a lot of people that are sort of signature hunters. This is a really great place to find signatures of ancestors or people that you're looking for. The next one, and again, this is maybe not something that you would think of immediately, are the Bendigo Council minute books. So again, people applying, objecting, doing all kinds of things with the council. The minutes are usually going to record what that looks like. So here we've got the Botanical Hotel, which goes to the Wellington, which becomes the Botanical again, and it does this dance over decades, back and forth between the names. Basically saying, there's a tree about to fall on my pub, can you please have a sort it? This collection is uncatalogued, but the council have given us permission to let people see them. Thankfully, to a huge project by Mike Butcher and Sandy Morris, these have been indexed. So again, you can look these up without needing to come in and go through and fossil through the actual books. And again, we've got the Shamrock recorded here, as is the case now. If you want to make an alteration to a building or your property, you want to knock something down, put something up, put a fence in, whatever, you need to get council's permission. That's pretty much always been the case. So this collection records all of those applications of people and businesses to make changes to their building. So here you can see that the Shamrock Hotel, this is I think 1926, want to cut through one of their brick walls. And that's what we've got. that record for. Now, connected to that record, and unfortunately it's not always the case, but obviously when you're applying, you usually have to submit some plans. And so what we've also got that connects to this, and is also uncatalogued, but is also indexed, are these amazing sets of plans, literal blueprints. I don't know if anyone's ever done any research on the Claude Neon Company, but wow, must they have made a fortune in the 40s and 50s, because everyone wanted a neon sign in front of their shop and their pub. So this is one from the Shamrock, obviously, Penfolds wine sponsorship. One for the City Family Hotel up on the corner, placement of where their neon sign's going to go. European Hotel out of Golden Square, again, keen to get themselves up in lights. And then we get these. Now, I love this sort of thing. I don't know why it appeals to me so much. So these are some proposed alterations to the British and American Hotel. It would be interesting to go and see if they actually ever did these.
Yeah.
The red parts are basically the bits that they want to alter. And you just get some really good detail about what they were using them for, what sort of rooms they were including, what services they were offering. This one's for the Newmarket Hotel up across from the old sale yards. And it's a big one because you can see, again, we're talking about horse accommodation before, all of these loose boxes right down the fence line. And we can go in for a bit of detail. Loose boxes, we've got a groom's room. So again, giving some idea of what actual day-to-day life at the pub looked like. And then inside, we've got our suggested alterations. So we get a really, really good idea of what's going on here. We've got a spirit shelf, we've got a beer shelf, we've got our little trapdoors and everything. Annual reports are a surprisingly interesting source. We keep saying this, not everyone believes us, but you can find some amazing photos in annual reports. You can find some amazing financials, obviously, but here what we've got is the Bendigo Hospital annual reports. And apart from their financials, they have a wonderful habit of recording all of their donors. So here we see on the left is our Mrs. Heffernan and Crowley, who have obviously put on an event for a specific building fund. I think that's 1859. Yep. So they've made a donation for a specific fund from an event that they've run. And then the other one we've got here is the list of life governors. So this was basically anyone who had a bit of cash who would commit to an annual donation of sorts. So again, once you've got names of hoteliers, you start finding them in these places as well. Charles, I'm going to give you a very, very important job here.
Oh,
here we go.
Hold on to that. Give it a bit of a shake. So while Charles is doing that, we're going to think about the garnishes that we want on our cocktail. Now, these are incidental appearances of hotels. So they're places, it's not specific to the hotel, it just happens to be included in those records. So the first ones we've got are the insolvency registers. What it says on the tin, basically. These are a register of the courts that are hearing cases around insolvencies, people who have gone bankrupt, recording what assets they do have, how they're going to meet their creditors' obligations, all of these sort of things. So we can see here we've got Mr. Minty from the Junction Hotel and Mr. Swiffen from the Shenandoah and Shamrock Hotel. Again, you see Shamrock in the name. Interestingly, they're described differently. I'm not clear on what, at this time, what the difference between a hotel keeper and a licensed fiddler was. As usual with our collections, you often get more questions at the end of the process than what you start with, which is one of the great things about it, I think. Then we've got probate. Now, this is somewhere that you may not necessarily think of straight away to find information about hotels, but if you can find someone who owned a hotel or ran a hotel, when their probate is lodged, it will often list a really detailed inventory of their assets at the time of their death. So what we can see here is Moritz Kahn, and it actually describes specifically the Bram Arms Hotel and where it is using the section and allotment information from the parish plan. We've got how many rooms it's got, we've got what it's constituted of and what it's rated at, and obviously that it's leased out. So in theory, you would see that reflected in the rate book, that he would own it, but it was being leased by someone else. Here's another one from John Illingworth. This is some of the inventory that he's got in his pub and brewery. So we see corks, we see different types of hops, a kilderkin. 16-gallon tub, apparently, so keep that in mind for your next pub quiz. But again, sometimes you're getting really specific descriptions of what's in their dining rooms, the type of crockery they're using, the type of silver serviceware they are or aren't using. And the final one that I find really interesting are the inquest records. So when someone's died unexpectedly, there will be an inquest to look into why they passed away. And these are often held in hotels. Where's the closest place with a cool store that you could put a body? It's the pub with the cellar. So you often see the place that these inquests are being held is at the pub. This is one of these things I was trying desperately to find one that was being held at the Shamrock Hotel as a relevant example to the talk tonight. I couldn't find one. Not a single one. I could find 2 inquests. They were both non-fatal fire inquests, which got me thinking, how did they choose which pubs that they were holding inquests at? Was it something that you wanted as a hotelier because you had suddenly a lot of clientele just ready captive in your pub? Did it give a bit of a stigma? Did you not want it? How did you make sure the police did or didn't give you the inquest to hold? So lots of questions there that I think would definitely go well with some more research. Another one we've got, same thing, Swan Hill Road Hotel out at Campbell's Forest. Again, you're not going to bring a body in the middle of summer all the way into Bendigo. You're going to have it at the hotel. And then we see a lot of this. So Bendigo, obviously a very, very transient population. Lots of people arriving who don't have friends, don't have families. They suddenly die. Who's going to identify that person? It's the landlady or the landlord. What have you done, Charles? I can't get this one. Goodness me. That's fine. So they'll often be called on to identify a body or a person, or be able to give some of their last movements, because again, that's probably where they're staying. They might understand, they might have heard over the bar talking about where they're from, where they were going next, who they knew, where some family actually might have been. Oh, goodness me. Someone's getting a short shift.
I reckon Charles might have had some.
I think he might. So that's our archive Adler. That's what you need to be looking at if you're looking and interested in hotel research. We're open every Wednesday and Thursdays upstairs in the library. Myself and my colleague, Dr. Walter, are more than happy to help you with your research. Obviously, there's a lot more in our collection than just these couple of things. But once you've got a name, so if you are interested in William Heffernan, as well as a building, we've got lots more resources that you can use to look at individuals and their time in Bendigo. So I'm happy to take some questions if we've got some time. Otherwise, thank you very much.
Great, what a fantastic presentation. Of course I'm going to ask, are you actually serving cocktails now?
Oh,
Hello. I'm not driving tonight, I'd like to. It smells good, it smells of good sauces.
Absolutely. All Charles's work.
Good.
Oh yeah, that's pretty cool. I will finish that later. But is there any questions from the audience? I can bring the microphone and people can hear. Either for Desiree or indeed for Mary as well, who's still here at the front. Is there any questions online as well, monitoring?
There was a not a question, but a comment from Jeffrey saying, "Good to see you, Mary."
Good to see you, Mary. There you go.
So there you go from
Friends
Jeff.
in the audience, which is really nice.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I should have that.
That's all right, I'll
Huge
shout.
shout.
Yeah.
If we start with the location, I would like to know, you suspect there was a hotel there. How do we go about that?
I would suggest the rate books as a start. So you would look up that part of the street that you're interested in, and it would have there what's on it. So it would have land and house, land and shops, land and building, land and hotel, and there's your key. They very rarely record the name of a hotel. It will just literally be land and hotel, and then the license keeper. So then you would have to do a bit of trove searching to find who the person, what pub the person was licensed for. But that would be the best place to start off with. Yeah.
Yeah.
How far towards Maryborough do you cover?
We don't actually cover Maryborough, so we cover 8 Shire districts. Mount Alexander Shire is the southernmost, and then I think Bullocky and Mildura, but we don't cover that western. And then Swan Hill, Gannawarra, Campaspe,
Loddon?
Loddon.
Does that go to Ballarat now? That go to Ballarat?
I think so. So Ballarat is still sort of getting set up in their new dig, so there's collections spread all over from that kind of district. The theory is, and why BRAC exists, is Prov look to house records as close to their point of origin as they can. So that would certainly be the intention, to have Maryborough, Denali, etc. at Ballarat, but it's not quite our district.
Thanks, Desiree. Other questions? Some people might want to come down and have that second cocktail. Okay, so there are people right at the back here. If there's anyone here with a question in the back row, we've got for Mary or for Desiree. They're just such great sources, Desiree. I mean, just really inventive. All that well. Did you want the mic? Yeah.
How long did it take for Mary to like actually learn the stuff for the book? The research.
Yeah, took about 10 years.
I said about 10 years. Yeah.
Wow.
It's a big process.
Yes, it took about 10 years. I had a rough sketch. The late Frank Fulford told me about the American connection, and so I decided I'd have to try and fill it in, and it was very difficult. America differs greatly from here because we had a newspaper from 1855 in Bendigo, but they couldn't even get the people to stay on the newspapers because of the gold rush in California. And then we had a lot of difficulty with collecting information about Heffernan, because I think the fact that I couldn't find a photo in Bendigo makes me think that he always wanted to be unknown, because any gold discoveries in America that I found were somebody called Heffernan. And I spent one big night, because all the people who went from New York to the Goldfields, they were called the Argonauts, and they are listed. And of course, I'm a bit cynical about computers, because I find you can never find it the next day. So I read through all these 250,000 names to try and ascertain whether he did go around. But I think he went round twice, actually, to the Goldfields. And of course, finding gold in America was difficult as well, because you had to take it across America to their mint in, I think it's, it begins with P, Philadelphia. And of course, there was no transport, so how he went. But that's where you took it to be assayed, and you had to hang around there while they worked on it and decided what your reward would be. So he did a lot of travelling, but of course it's not documented.
Thanks, Mary. You paint such a rich picture, I think. So I love the part where you're talking about people sort of queuing up and then ducking out to have a drink. I think it just really paint a nice picture and really sort of evoke that time, and put Heffernan in his context really nicely in the city of Bendigo. So thank you so much for that. And thanks again, Desiree. And just before we...
Got one question,
got a question,
that I
yes.
think Desiree would like to answer.
Oh, good.
This is from someone, from Jenny. It says, I'm in Melbourne. Do we need to contact you in advance with a name/hotel before we go up to Bendigo to research? If so, is there an email address? I'll pop the email address in the chat. But
Yep, so Geordie will have the email address there. Not really, so we can provide the resources to you that you need to search, and then you would just go and look for whichever names take your fancy, basically.
That's great, and great to see that some of these things, some of them have indexes, which is just
Great.
so valuable. Having trawled through a few things myself, indexes are amazing. So very valuable, and thank you for sharing. It's really great to see them up on the screen as well. So thanks so much, everybody. I'm just going to give a little blurb, a little spruiking of our next Discovering History seminar, which will be on Thursday, the 1st of August at 5:30, and that's with Dr. Susan Walter, who's also from the Bendigo Regional Archives Centre. And Susan will be presenting on Malmesbury Bluestone, which is now a global heritage stone resource. Some of you might remember Susan's talked on this before. She was really integral to that process of getting the Bluestone listed as a global heritage stone. So she'll talk about how it came to be the first Australian stone to be a global heritage stone, and what it took to achieve that kind of recognition. So it should be a really fascinating talk by Dr. Susan, and we'll finish there. Mary's books are available for sale, I think, just at the back if people want to wander up there and maybe chat a bit more to Mary. So thank you so much. Thank you so much to our speakers. We'll have a round of applause.